grew up playing them, but I've never really been that good of a game player. I've never been that hardcore of a game player. I've actually been more, I always wanted to be the guy in his garage who wrote, like the one guy in his garage who wrote games, or two guys who wrote games. And when I got to the software industry in '95, finally, it was already like you had to be a team of 40 people to make games, and now you have to be a team of like 300 people to make games, and it doesn't interest me in the slightest. So, unfortunately. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you add a game to the emulator, one that hasn't been emulated until now, can you tell us kind of at a high level, what is that process? Where do you start? What are the steps you go through?
Well, it depends on how you got the game. So sometimes you'll have some guy out there saying, hey, I got this random board in a junk pile, and there's a bunch of ROMs on it, and I dump them, and they don't match anything that's in the database in name. So figure out what it is. So we go and we say, okay, what's in the ROM? So a lot of it's, can you find the code? You want to find some code in there. If there's no code in the ROMs, and you can tell by the patterns, you get used to looking at patterns. You can say, oh, this is graphics data, this is sound data, you know what that looks like. You know what code data looks like, it's kind of randomy, it's got some text in it. You start with that, and then you say, okay, well, what kind of CPU is it? You always start with the CPU. Once you have the CPU, you start running the code and looking at it line by line and say, okay, what's the code trying to do? And a lot of times it's trying to reach out to all the I/O devices. So there's some sound chips it's trying to talk to, and some video hardware it's trying to talk to, and some RAM it needs. And there's some basic stuff that every CPU needs, and so you kind of start to fill that in piece by piece. And then you build it up from there. And a lot of the early emulation worked that way because nobody knew how to read schematics, nobody knew how to, they existed, there weren't as good archives. Like there's these awesome people who go out there and collect all the manuals and make PDFs of them and put them up. Those guys rock, and you guys should be appreciative for that because, like, even as a cabinet owner, being able to grab the turbo manual and the PDF file and figuring out why this board isn't working is great. But it's also great because a lot of the early games, especially, had schematics for them. Schematics enable much more perfect emulation because for people who can read them, you can figure out, well, what happens when I do read a memory location that doesn't exist, and you can make it so that when you run your new Donkey Kong levels that they behave the way they did on the arcade because we understand how the hardware works. And so I think if I have schematics for something, that's a whole new ball of wax. I can sit down and just kind of say, okay, I can analyze the circuit and see how it does it. But if you're just starting from the ROMs, a lot of times it's just find the CPU, see what it does, start to flesh out. You can imagine what a game does. It draws stuff to the screen, there's some RAM behind the screen, it talks to some sound chips and patterns. There's certain things that you just kind of learn to do, and it's more through experimentation and understanding how games work to kind of get to that point.
How far down ultimately are you interested in emulating? I mean, I keep hearing things about people who have cabinets that aren't stored in the right place or whatever, and some of these the chips aren't seeded well, and they develop very interesting characteristics as a result. How much of that are you actually interested in doing, or is it enough at the end of the day to just go, well, the game runs?
Well, obviously you want to focus on what works. It is possible today to simulate RAM errors, simple RAM errors. Through the cheat engine or the debugger, that's certainly possible to do. We haven't really strived to do that, but through some of the mechanisms that exist today, we can simulate some behaviors. We can simulate burn-in. You can make a nice overlay, like some burn-in on your monitor if you like that kind of thing. Actually, I've always, one of my features that I've on my back burner is to make a burn-in generator that'll generate a piece of artwork that looks like burn-in, so you can put it on top of another game and see like Centipede behind your Pac-Man or whatever. I think that's totally possible to do. There's other things that you can do. Every time you do that, you're adding complexity that takes away a little bit from focusing, because as a documentation project, you really want to focus on how does it work, not so much how can it fail. But how can it fail is a useful thing for those who are trying to solve their problems, and so I recognize that. And so, yeah, it's kind of a trade-off, but we haven't really put much effort into trying to look at how a lot of things fail beyond being able to simulate occasional ROM failures or whatever. I mean, you can go today and say, you can go whack a byte in a ROM and see if you get a bad checksum and see if it matches the bad checksum that you get on your board to see which one's bad. Or you can dump all the ROMs in your board and compare them against the database and Mame to see what's there and what's not there. So those are both ways that I think that we can do that. ROMs are easy, RAMs are a little easy. Some of the weird behaviors not so easy. I think we got enough work to do, frankly. So I haven't put much time in that. Want to take one more, I think, before we go, Ken? Okay. One more.
What's your opinion about Mame cabinets being sold on the internet and eBay? And
I'm fine with them being sold if they don't include Mame or illegal material. Frankly, a lot of these guys play fast and loose, and that's unfortunate. You know, it's a touchy issue because I'd love to be able to go to and talk to all the game companies and have them provide a way for everybody to just buy the ROMs. Realistically, that's never going to happen because A, finding out who owns what is very hard. That's not really a good excuse. B, when you do find out who they do it, who owns it, they don't care. They don't want to. I mean, to them, what could they possibly make off of it? You know, a few dollars. It's not important to their bottom line to do it, to really do it. And so there are a few companies that really will go after the people who sell, you know, their games on that, as they should. I think, you know, I like to keep this a hobbyist project, and that's one of the reasons I often get offers. Here, let me advertise for you. Let me help you reach more people. I'm not really that interested in that, thank you. That's why it's developer focused. That's why we don't put much effort into user interface. That's why, you know, it can do these things. And I think for people who want to put the effort into it and do it, treat it as a hobby, and who really want to, you know, really care enough to do it, that's probably fine, and they're probably gonna, you know, get away with it because an individual, you know, doing some things isn't gonna really upset a company. What's gonna upset a company is if a lot of people go out and they sell these cabinets, they put a bunch of illegal material on there, and then it all comes back and say, well, they all point to Mame and say, well, it's because of Mame. That's what I want to avoid, and that's why, you know, we've gone up and down in terms of how aggressive we are about yelling at people who are like on eBay and that sort of thing, selling cabinets with the games. Sell the cabinet, fine. Let people put the stuff in there. But people want to sell turnkey solutions because that's what, you know, a user who not into the whole thing, they do that. But you know what? The user who wants the turnkey solution can probably buy some of the licensed stuff, and he'd be perfectly happy. He'd buy the Midway cabinets that they've put out, and they've put out, you know, OBT cabinet and some other things. That'd probably be totally fine for them. He's not really that into it. I think the person who's really into it is going to put the effort in, and you know, if they want to use Mame for that, you know, it's in their own privacy of their own home. Don't make money off of it. Just if you're doing it because you love it and for your own use, that's fine. Don't sell it. And I've worked out with a lot of the big cabinet guys to tell them not to do that. I think in the end that's good. One of the reasons, you know, if you know Mame's history, we got into a little bit of a issue with owning the trademark Mame. Another company tried to trademark Mame and use it to batter people on for legal reasons. And we took that back and said, hey, look, we'll do it. Point out cases that you feel are infringing. We'll help you kind of try and do what we can to do it. So it's a limited effort. Again, it takes away from the fun of the project because it's not really what you want to be doing. On the other hand, it's sort of a necessary evil to keep doing what we're doing because I really want to protect what we do. I think what we do is important. I don't want it to be frowned upon by people who could really benefit from it. You know, I think that a company should appreciate, hopefully, that, you know, if they want to do an emulation of a game, they got a good example of how to make it work. They don't have to keep all that stuff themselves and figure it out and dig up all their old archives. And so, I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel. It's an issue. I know that a lot of people have different opinions about how good or bad that whole thing is, but you know, just don't make money off that stuff. That's really important to me. I think that's it. I think I'll leave you guys to the next person.